You know, Washington, D.C. isn't just a city full of marble buildings and monuments. It's really an idea that was built from the ground up to be the physical form of a brand new republic. So let's dive into the story of how this grand experiment in city planning became the enduring heart of a nation. A pedestal awaiting a monument. That's what Pierre Charles L'Enfant said. He was the visionary French engineer that George Washington picked to design the Capitol. And when he looked out at this one particular rise, Jenkins Hill, he didn't just see a piece of land. No, he saw the future site of the U.S. Capitol, the symbolic center of American democracy. I mean, think about that for a second. How do you actually do that? It's one thing to write down big ideas like separation of powers on a piece of parchment. But how do you translate that whole philosophy into stone and steel and a city grid? Well, that's the incredible story we're exploring today. Right, so before a single stone was ever laid, the city already existed as a concept, authorized by the Constitution itself. See, this wasn't a capital that just sort of evolved over hundreds of years. It was deliberately and with great intention willed into existence. And it all happened remarkably fast. I mean, think about it. The Constitution gives the green light in 1787. Just 3 years later, after some pretty intense political deal-making, the Potomac River is chosen. A year after that, L'Enfant is already on the ground, mapping out his grand vision. And by 1800, the entire federal government is packing its bags in Philadelphia and heading south to its new, and still very much unfinished, home. Now, the absolute genius of L'Enfant's design is how it was so much more than just pretty streets. Those broad diagonal avenues, they weren't just for show. They were specifically designed to connect the Congress House to the President's house, creating these amazing long vistas. It was a physical link between the legislative and executive branches. It was literally a map of the Constitution just laid out on the landscape. Incredible, right? Okay, so with the blueprint in place, the focus turns to construction. It was time to raise the very first great pillars of American government, right out of the Maryland soil. So the two main anchors of this new city were, of course, the President's House, a really refined Georgian mansion designed by an Irish architect, James Hoban, and the grand neoclassical Capitol, which was based on a plan by Dr. William Thornton. And get this, in a pretty amazing moment in history, both buildings became operational in the year 1800. John Adams moved into the still unfinished White House that November, right as Congress was gathering for the very first time in its new home. And the White House was, and still is, just immense. This wasn't just a house, it was a statement. Today, it has 132 rooms, 35 bathrooms, and 28 fireplaces, all spread out over 6 different levels. I mean, that's a scale that was designed to project the power and the permanence of this new republic. And just to give you another sense of its sheer size, it takes 570 gallons of white paint just to cover the outside. That massive job is a constant reminder of the building's status as this powerful national symbol. But wait, what about the third branch of government? You know, it's pretty fascinating to realize that for almost a century and a half, the Supreme Court was basically just a tenant in the Capitol building. They moved from one room to another. It wasn't until 1935 that the court finally got its own magnificent home. But this new Capitol would face its greatest test just 14 years after the government moved in. This was a moment that really could have destroyed the young city, but instead, it's what forged its identity in resilience. A magnificent ruin. That is how the U.S. Capitol was described after August 1814. British troops had burned it along with the White House during the War of 1812. The interiors were completely gutted, leaving only the stone walls standing, just a shell. But the recovery was extraordinary. The original architects were actually brought back to oversee the rebuilding. The most powerful chapter, though, came during the Civil War. As the nation was literally tearing itself apart, President Lincoln demanded that construction on the Capitol's new, massive cast-iron dome continue. For him, it was this profound symbol that the Union would endure. And it did. All right, let's move outside to the space that L'Enfant called the Grand Avenue, that great public park at the heart of the city. Because for most of the 19th century, well, it was anything but grand. It's really hard to imagine today, but the area that we all know as the National Mall was a complete mess. L'Enfant's vision of this beautiful, garden-lined promenade had been totally ignored. You had a noisy, smoky railroad station sitting right there on the mall, with tracks crisscrossing the whole landscape. The old Washington Canal had basically turned into a foul-smelling open sewer. The whole place was just a chaotic jumble of industrial shacks and workshops. Honestly, it was a national embarrassment. The turning point, finally, was the McMillan Plan of 1901. A commission of architects and planners inspired by the City Beautiful movement decided to restore L'Enfant's original vision. They got rid of the railroad, filled in the canal, and created the sweeping green vista that we all know and love today. And over the next 100 years or so, this reclaimed space was slowly populated with meaning. It became a kind of sacred national stage. From the towering Washington Monument, which was finally finished in 1884, to the powerful Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial that opened in 2011, the mall has become the place where America comes to remember, to protest, and to celebrate. Now, all of these magnificent structures, they were built to serve and protect an idea. And that idea is written on 6 very fragile sheets of parchment. They're known as the Charters of Freedom. Of course, you know them, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. Housed in the rotunda of the National Archives, these documents are really the philosophical soul of the nation. They represent the very promise that the city of Washington was built to fulfill. You know, the science of preserving these documents is absolutely fascinating. The original cases from 1951 were filled with helium, but they had a major flaw. Moisture got trapped inside, and it caused the glass to deteriorate. So the new cases from 2003 are a marvel of engineering. They're made of titanium and aluminum and filled with inert argon gas. Why argon? Well, its atoms are bigger, so they're less likely to leak out. They can even be opened up for maintenance. It's truly space-age technology protecting 18th century promises. When you think about it, this city is so much more than its history. It's a foundation. These incredible buildings and these priceless documents, they're our inheritance. They're a promise passed down through generations. And so they leave us with a really vital question. What will we, in our time, build upon this foundation? Hey, if you found this journey through the history of our nation's capital as fascinating as I did, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. We'd love to know your thoughts, so let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching.